Good afternoon. I was asked to discuss how ICT companies can apply or adapt their business to align with the guiding principles in business and human rights. And before I proceed with my short discussion, I would like to thank first the Foundation for Media Alternatives for the important work that they continue to do and for giving me the privilege to participate. So, nakita natin, no, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, that the blur between the separation of offline and our offline lives have been increasing. So the COVID-19 pandemic further accelerated this process because we cannot gather physically. We were forced to find other ways to communicate, to learn, and to do business. And invariably, this led us to adopt more digital approaches in achieving whatever it is that we wanted to do. So in the past months talaga, nakita yung outsized role of ICT-related companies. Mas ramdam natin yung effect in our lives when we cannot connect to the internet. And the strength of the telco signal actually had a significant effect on the quality of our lives. So, as I said earlier, I will be discussing how we can encourage or even um, parang require ICT-related companies to more fully incorporate human rights in their businesses. So earlier, Jam talked about the rights to privacy and freedom of expression in the digital environment. So I will take off a bit from his discussion, and I would like to propose some policy approaches to increase the awareness of ICT companies on their role as business enterprises in upholding human rights. So ano ba yung mga ways na nakikita ko? Actually, if you think about it, my recommendations can also apply to other companies. So hindi lang sa ICT companies, but I will, as much as possible, try to focus my examples on ICT-related companies. So what are the approaches that I propose? We have four approaches. So one would be incorporating human rights in significant legislation. Another would be incorporating human rights in regulatory reporting. And then for the third approach, pwede natin i-incorporate yung human rights by making it one of the standards for benchmarking. And finally, we can also encourage ICT-related companies to incorporate human rights in their business by making human rights the measure for the issuance of company certifications, trust marks, or yung tinatawag nilang seal of good corporate housekeeping. Okay, so I will be discussing the first requirement. So for number one, incorporating human rights in important legislation. What I think is the best example in this case would be the recent revision of the Corporation Code of the Philippines. So last year, the Batas Pambansa Bilang 68, which was the original Corporation Code of the Philippines, was finally repealed. So nagkaroon ng revised Corporation Code which became effective around February of 2019. Unfortunately, okay, yung revision of the Corporation Code actually took quite some time because there needed to be a lot of discussions with a lot of the stakeholders. Unfortunately, I think that the discussions with stakeholders kind of focused on the members of the business community. Medyo nakalimutan din yung ibang stakeholders, which is not really surprising because most of the time, civil society, human rights-focused organizations tend to be forgotten when it comes to legislations relating to business. Kasi parang it's not an automatic a train of thought dun sa mga legislators na ay may inputs din pala yung civil society organizations. So anyway, why is this a great example for our first approach? So nung nagkaroon ng revisions to sa corporation code, one of the organizations that actually came out with a position paper was the Commission on Human Rights. And the Commission on Human Rights actually proposed amending the amending the corporation code and adding the principles of do no harm, adding the principle of corporate human rights due diligence dun sa requirements of the corporation code. So, foremost of this, actually, yung pag-adapt sana ng mga corporations ng isang corporate statement on their commitment to human rights. And unfortunately, the revisions proposed by the Commission on Human Rights were not included in what eventually became the law. So this, I think, was a very real missed opportunity. Kasi if we were able to incorporate sana the proposed revisions of the Commission on Human Rights, it would have made more permanent impact, diba? Because there was already a law requiring corporations to incorporate human rights in the way that they do business. Okay, so the second approach that we can look at is incorporating human rights in regulatory reporting requirements. So there have been some efforts in this regard. Not exactly focused on human rights, pero medyo nakahagip yung human rights. And I'm referring to the sustainability reporting requirements. So under SEC Memorandum Circular number 4, na requiring publicly listed companies to submit an annual sustainability report. So the report is primarily aimed at requiring the disclosure of non-financial information with emphasis on management of economic, environmental, social, and governance issues of businesses. So actually, itong effort na to is also taking off kasi there is increased awareness also among investors that they would like to invest in businesses that are more focused on yung tinatawag nilang EESG issues. So, in order to also encourage companies to align their businesses dun sa mga EESG issues, nagkaroon na din ng sustainability reporting. Now, if we look at the guidance that was issued by the Securities and Exchange Commission on the reporting, we can see that the requirements actually still fall far short of the ideal. So the reporting requirement template states that disclosures on social topics that relate to how the organization manages yung relationship nila with its stakeholders, such as employees, customers, suppliers, communities, the public, and the government. It includes disclosures on issues related to human rights, access to and quality of products and services, responsible business practices in marketing, customer privacy, and data security. However, if we look at the specific items, particularly dun sa human rights, when we look at the disclosure requirements, makikita natin that this is actually more tied to workplace conditions and labor standards. And ideally, the disclosure of human rights impacts should also have been included dun sa areas relating to how a company relates to its community and also areas relating to customer management. So, in terms of ICT-related companies, makikita din natin na when it comes to relationship with their communities, isa dun sa mga issues na pwede nilang tignan dito would be how they can contribute to efforts on curbing online sexual exploitation of children. In fact, in a recent study conducted by the International Justice Mission, yung results nila, one of the recommendations that they made was for technology platforms to be able to do a proactive detection of live streaming of OSEC. Kasi nakikita na hindi pa hindi pa madaling ma-detect yung live streaming. I think when it comes to pictures, when it comes to video, medyo mas madali na nilang ma-detect because mas permanent kasi yon. It's usually stored someplace. Pero dun sa live streaming, it's still difficult. Another recommendation that the IJM made was that there should be improved reporting of suspected online sexual exploitation of minors on the ICT platforms. So, kailangan daw ma-expand at mas strengthen yung reporting na to, and ideally, magkaroon ng mandatory reporting. Now, if we look at in relation to ICT-related companies, meron na actually mandatory reporting in our law when it comes to online exploitation and trafficking of women and children. Unfortunately, I don't think that this is actually being faithfully enforced. I guess, parang two-sided yung issues when it comes to the enforcement of this requirement. One is pagdating dun sa government, I don't know if talagang it was well thought out. Yung requirement ng mandatory reporting kasi necessary consequence nito, of course, is surveillance. Diba? That's the only way that you can do the reporting if you will be able to catch them at the live streaming and at provision of online pornography, etc., etc. But then, meron din kasing privacy issues na kalakip netong mandatory reporting na to. And then, when it comes naman to ICT-related companies, well, one of the issues that they have raised before, aside from the privacy issues, was also the cost that comes with putting up an infrastructure to be able to monitor and detect all of these activities as they are ongoing. Okay, now moving on to another proposal. Okay, so number 3 is to incorporate human rights in benchmarking. So nakikita din natin to that when companies are benchmarked against their peers, nagkakaroon din ng pressure sa kanila. This is more of a voluntary pressure actually, no? It's a voluntary initiative for the companies to comply and to be able to compete with the standards of their peers. So yung isang nakikita ko dito is the Bell Awards, which is an annual corporate governance awards that is being given out by the Philippine Stock Exchange. So how can this be used as a tool for incorporating human rights in business? I think that if the PSE takes another look at the standards or the metrics that they use for the benchmarking, and perhaps they can add more human rights related measures, then mako-compel din yung mga businesses to measure up, diba? So that they will get good scores when they're already when their corporate governance is reviewed and measured, diba? So I'd also like to highlight, however, that yung focus talaga netong awards na to is more on corporate governance. So I think dun din kailangan na ipasok natin, and this is not something that a lot of companies have a lot of awareness at present, how aligned yung observance and protection of human rights dun sa corporate social responsibility of companies. Okay? Another example that I can give, and this one is really more focused on ICT-related companies, is the Ranking Digital Rights effort. It's an ongoing project that is implemented by the New America Foundation. So, sa Ranking Digital Rights, they have a certain metric that they come up with every year. So, every year nagbabago siya because they try to incorporate new requirements, and they also try to get I think they improve their metrics based on the reactions also of the companies that were measured. So yung kanilang reactions from the previous year, and then they also go through a stakeholder consultation on any adjustments to their metrics, diba? So RDR ranks companies on their disclosed commitments, policies, and practices affecting freedom of expression and privacy of internet users across the world. Now, when it comes to the Philippines, I don't think that, actually, I'm sure that wala pang Philippines-based ICT company that has been included in the measure of RDR. So this is something perhaps that local advocacy organizations can take a look at, kasi the RDR metrics are actually available online, and perhaps local organizations can adapt these metrics and also start using them to measure and benchmark ICT companies in the Philippines. Okay, and finally, another way that I think we can incorporate human rights into business operations of companies is by incorporating human rights in company certifications or trust marks or good housekeeping seals. So again, mas nakikita ko to when it comes to information security requirements and when it comes to privacy. There have been certifications and trust marks on privacy that have been available to companies overseas, diba? Unfortunately, in the Philippines, wala pa tayong company certification that's related to privacy. I also don't know if there are company-related certifications on other issues like freedom of expression, for instance. But this is something that we can take a look at. So yun, these are some of the approaches that ranging from mandatory, which would be mandated by legislation, to voluntary, diba? Yung benchmarking and yung company certification. So there are a lot of approaches that we can actually consider in order to encourage businesses to align their operations more into observance and protection of human rights. Before I end, I think what is noteworthy, a noteworthy development when it comes to protection of human rights is yung current action that a lot of companies, surprisingly, are taking in respect of the anti-terrorism bill. So I'm heartened to see that there have been a lot of companies, actually including yung Makati Business Club and other corporate organizations that have come out with in support of initiatives relating to junking the anti-terrorism bill. So sana lang, this type of advocacy is also translated into internal company operations. So I think that is something that we can certainly work toward in cooperation with organizations like Foundation for Media Alternatives, and also in cooperation with organizations like the Philippine Stock Exchange. So again, thank you to FMA for giving me the privilege to participate, and I hope that I've been able to impart some ideas that are worth thinking of when it comes to adoption of business and human rights in the Philippines. Thank you and good afternoon.